thank you for joining us for the IDEA MOE update. Our topics today will review the compliance review process, we'll review the LAA submission process, we'll review the data sources that are used in the calculation, and as always, we'll give you our contact and resource information. You'll be pleased to know that there aren't hardly any changes this year. Everything's pretty much the same. Our process, our procedures are the same as they have been the last couple of years, so this will be a review for most everybody. So our compliance review process, our planning TTAA was posted on March the 7th, a couple of weeks ago. As you remember, we post that TTA, we call that the Heads Up TTAA, and we post that early on because once the preliminary IDEA compliance reviews are posted, then we ask districts to have to submit documentation for exceptions in about a 5-day turnaround period. So that's why we send out a Heads Up TTAA. We ask LEAs to begin gathering their documentation, gathering their exception information, and preparing for the preliminary rollouts. So our preliminary compliance reviews are expected to be posted in GFFC reports in early April. We're shooting for around April 1st. At the time those are posted in GFFC, we'll send out a TTAA letter and or a GovDelivery bulletin letting districts know that they're posted and available in GFFC reports. At that point, then districts will review their preliminary IDEA MOE results, and if they're failing any one test, then they can decide whether or not they're going to be submitting an exceptions workbook and the documentation that goes with that exceptions workbook. And again, the LEA submission, we ask for a quick turnaround, 5 business days, and districts will submit the exceptions workbook with documentation and certification to GFFC reports. As I said, our process is the same as last year. However, there is a new exceptionally costly threshold amount. It's $9,759. That's that figure comes from the 2016-17 state per pupil expenditure data. So we want you to help us encourage districts to start gathering their data and their documentation now. So this is a review for those of you who have done this before. There are 5 exceptions that are legally permissible under 34 CFR section 300-204. The exceptions are voluntary departure of personnel, a decrease in enrollment in students with disabilities. The third one is termination of an exceptionally costly program, and that's where that 9759 figure comes in. Termination of costly long-term purchases, and assumption of costs by the Federal High Cost Fund grant, which is Fund 226. Then also at this time, districts can claim their adjustment to fiscal effort, or what we call MOE voluntary reduction, if they're eligible for that reduction. So the exceptions workbook is posted on the IDEA B LEA MOE webpage. So when districts get ready to fill out and submit the data, we would ask them to fill out the exceptions workbook, fill out the MOE certification signed by the superintendent, and provide any supporting documentation to justify the amounts reported in the exceptions workbook for each of the allowable exceptions. Now, we would ask your help on this particular thing this year. It would help us a lot, and it would help districts also to streamline the exceptions documentation. We ask that districts gather all pertinent targeted documentation for all exceptions, create one packet, and submit once. In the past, we've had districts sometimes submit supporting documents. It's like 10 submissions with hundreds of pages in each submission. So it's very difficult for us to wade through that many pages of documentation and find the amount that matches up to the exceptions workbook. So we're asking districts to submit one packet and do not send pages and pages of line items that we don't need. Sometimes we get, especially for voluntary reduction of personnel, sometimes they'll send us every line item of their paychecks, and we have to go through and try to find them and total them. It takes a lot of time, and if we don't find everything, sometimes districts may not get the full benefit of the exception. So it would help us out a lot if you would encourage them to send the documentation that shows the totals, the bottom line numbers to support the amounts. It helps a lot also if they would highlight, underline, or mark the specific amounts that correspond to the amounts listed in the exceptions workbook. And also help them pay attention to that we're only looking for state, local, locally funded amounts. If you have a teacher that was funded with federal money, of course that teacher wasn't included in the MOE calculation, therefore that teacher can't be included as an exception. So remind them to pay attention to only fund codes 199 and 420 for charters, PIC codes 23 and 33, and be careful not to include any federally funded amounts. So the bottom line is, if districts focus in on the documentation that supports their specific number in the document, highlight it and mark it, then the review process will go a lot faster and a lot easier and a lot more accurate. As you know, we do accept submissions of significant PEIMS errors. If a district has found that they've submitted PEIMS that was in error related to special ed amounts, they should send an email to the compliance mailbox alerting us that they will be submitting a PEIMS error, and then submit to GFFC reports and data collections the completed IDEA calculation tool signed by the LEA's auditor showing the corrected amounts. Also, a detailed schedule prepared and signed by the auditor, which includes both the erroneous and corrected PEIMS data, sort of a side-by-side document that shows us, here's the data that was wrong, here's what it should be. And then supporting documentation for the corrected data, and a description of how the error occurred and the administrative procedures taken to assure that such PEIMS data errors do not reoccur. All of that is submitted into the GFFC reports under IDEA B supporting documentation. So the corrected PEIMS data should be provided to TEA in the appropriate PEIMS format. So in other words, make it correspond to the fund and function codes that we're using in the calculation, to show us what was erroneous and what was the original PEIMS data that was erroneous and what it should be. And so we'll take the numbers that the LEA sends us and use those numbers in our database. Of course, we know that PEIMS at this point for 17-18 cannot be corrected, but it will be corrected in our database for MOE. So this is a reminder of the data sources used in the calculation. Every year we ask districts to do their own calculation and compare it to our results. Every year we get lots and lots of calls from districts that say, I did the calculation and I don't get the same results that you got. And in every case we found that when that happened, it was because they were not using the same data source that we were using. So we have posted a data sources document on the IDEA B LEA MOE webpage. It's updated for 17-18, and in that document it includes these reports and these line items. So for the special education child counts, we use the PEIMS report called PDM 1-121-003. This is special ed students by grade and instructional setting and funding type. It's LEA level data, all campuses this is the 17-18 fall collection, accepted submission, and the line that you use there is the total number indicated on the Idea B line, not the grade total line. So be sure that you're looking at the right line in that report. For PEIMS reports of expenditures, we use PDM 2-101-002. This is the PEIMS actual compliance report, LEA level data, unallocated funds only for all campuses. This is the 18-19 mid-year collection. It's the first submission, and it's for fiscal year 2018, which is the 17-18 school year. And of course, we're only looking at PICs 23 and 33. SSAs also report for fiscal agents and members in an SSA. The fiscal agent reports in the PDM 2-100-015. This is the PEIMS actual SSA financial summary by fund and SSA type, LEA level data. These are the expenditures paid on behalf of the LEA, and we call this the 033 record. Expenditures paid on behalf of the LEA reported by the fiscal agent via the 033 record. And we're looking at Fund Code 437, Type 11. And then, of course, the SHARS data. We called for the SHARS reimbursement report survey in the fall. This was related to the 17-18 SHARS reimbursement that were respent in special ed. And so districts self-reported that in the fall, and that data will be factored in to the MOE calculation as well. Then also to calculate the local only, we pull data from the 17-18 summary of finance. We pull the first near final payment cycle report, and we use the LPE column, lines 29, 38, and 39. So again, all of these data sources are summarized in a handout that's posted on the IDIB LEA webpage. So here's how the process goes. For an LEA that submits federal exceptions or voluntary MOE reduction or a PEIMS error or any kind of other state reconsideration during the preliminary results process, our TEA staff, our FFCR staff will review and validate the LEA responses with the supporting documentation. So we review the exceptions workbook, we look for the supporting documentation. In the supporting documentation, we make sure that there's a certification, and if all that jives, then those amounts are accepted. If we have questions or if there's a discrepancy, then we reach out to the LEAs and ask for additional information or clarifying documentation. Once all of those are reviewed and approved, the compliance unit sends that data to the analytics unit that's doing the calculation, and then those exceptions, the approved exceptions, will then be factored into the final results. And then TEA will issue, we won't necessarily notify districts if we're approving exceptions. If we're not approving it or we have a question, then we always reach out and call, either email or call the LEA. The next notification will occur when we post the final compliance review reports. And then at that time, we'll issue another TTAA notification. We'll say the final compliance review reports are now ready, and you can view your report in GFFC Reports and Data Collections. So the final compliance reviews will come out, of course, after TEA has reviewed and approved all submitted exceptions and adjustments. And our goal for release is June in 2019. So we're hoping to get these completed and finished by early June so that districts will have these reports when they start filling out their SPED Consolidated Grant applications in June. So here's the contact information. As always, Federal Fiscal Compliance and Reporting, our compliance mailbox email address, our phone number, On the IDIB LEA Maintenance of Effort webpage, we have the guidance handbook, we have the updated calculation tool and instructions, the updated data sources document, and federal guidance is all there. So essentially, it's the same process. We're hoping it's getting easier for districts. It'll help us out if they'll streamline their documentation and we don't have to. Sometimes it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, looking for the dollar amount that matches what they have in the exceptions workbook. So we're gonna ask that they try to streamline it and mark it for us, and hopefully that'll make the process run a little bit smoother. Are there any questions?
Will you be able to share the slide deck with me so I can put it in the SharePoint site for future reference to the SPED directors?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Sherry Marsh with Region 20. I have one question. On the exceptions with personnel, you mentioned it was for voluntary departure.
Right.
What if it is a reduction in force and that teacher shifts out of that position?
No, reduction in force doesn't count for voluntary reduction.
Okay.
USDE specifically says a reduction in force is not voluntary.
Okay. So if you did away with that program, then it could potentially go into that costly program exception.
So let's go back to the exceptions. So remember that the second bullet, decrease in enrollment, is an exception that's tied to not necessarily a total decrease in enrollment, but perhaps you had a life skills unit at a middle school and you had several of those students rolling up to the high school and you didn't have enough for the life skills unit and you did away with the life skills unit. So it could be a campus specific or a unit specific decrease in enrollment that justified eliminating a program or eliminating a teacher. You didn't need as many teachers because you had several students that left. That's tied to a total group enrollment. Now,
okay.
Termination of an exceptionally costly program, remember that one's tied to individual students. That
Okay.
would be kind of like similar to the high cost fund student, a student that has, say a student has an interpreter and a one-on-one aide or something like that. If you had a student that had costs that were over the $97.59 average cost for a student, and then that student either left the district or graduated or aged out or no longer needed that program. So that's one way to think about that. You have to tie that one to a specific student.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
This is Cindy Moses at Region 9. For the voluntary reduction based on the additional federal funds that most districts got last year, I mean, in comparison, most of them could take that voluntary reduction, which is kind of key. What paper report are we looking for to make sure that they have the meets on that front page rather than needs assistance or whatever?
I'm sorry, whoever is speaking, we can barely hear you.
I'm not sure what the problem is. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
I think you were asking about voluntary reduction. Voluntary reduction, remember, a district qualifies for MOE voluntary reduction if they meet 3 criteria. The first of those is if they have an increase in their federal allocation from one year to the next. So from 16-17 to 17-18, that you had an increase in your federal IDIB money, your 611 money. And so probably most everybody did because you got that supplemental. So a lot of people may meet that criteria for voluntary reduction. The other two criteria are that you, in the SPED determination system, you have to have a meets expectations, and that's in the TAPR, the TAPR report for 15-16. You would look at your 15-16 TAPR, and on the cover sheet of that TAPR report, it says SPED determination, and you would have to have meets expectations. And then the third criteria is you cannot have been identified as having significant disproportionality. Now, there are only a handful, maybe even only a couple of districts that had significant disproportionality, so it's likely that most districts will meet that one. But the one you have to be careful about is that SPED determination, and you find that again in the TAPR report, and there's a lag time for syncing up the years. So for 17-18 MOE, you would be looking at the 15-16 TAPR. Did that answer your question?
Yes, the message came through on chat. What TAPR report will we use to make sure they can take the voluntary reduction 16-17 or 15-16? And then when you were talking, she said, "Thank you. That answers my question."
Right. And if you'll look in the exceptions workbook on the last tab that has voluntary reduction, I have included it in there, and it specifically references the TAPR report that you should look at. So you should have it written in that exceptions workbook. You should find it in there. Any other questions?
If something else comes up after this meeting, can they email you directly?
Absolutely. Yeah, the compliance mailbox. If you have any other questions, give us a call or email the compliance mailbox, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy.
Okay, thanks in advance. We know y'all help us a lot in getting the districts lined out about what we need for all this, so we appreciate all your help.